I thought Hamilton had it right. He said a national debt could be a national blessing. And the national debt, having a liquid market there, provides a good benchmark for the private sector. It probably underpins the role of the dollar in the world. It allows the Fed to conduct monetary policy easily. I think we have to keep in mind the costs of paying down the debt. There is, among some people, a single-minded focus on it. But there's no free lunch in this world. And eliminating the national debt, while it may sound attractive, has its costs as well. The president, by the way, in his program, is paying down as much debt as we can retire in the next 10 years. We're moving in that direction, but whether we should pay it all off, I think, is a more open question.
That was Larry Lindsey, director of the National Economic Council under President George W. Bush, appearing on Wall Street Week back in March of 2001, back when the concern was about possibly having too little federal debt rather than too much. To take us through our current, very different situation, welcome back now Nobel Prize-winning economist and New York Times columnist Paul Krugman of the City University of New York. So, Dr. Krugman, thank you so much for being back with us. As I say, it was a very different time then when they thought we may eliminate the national debt. But now we're hearing a lot from people saying they're concerned it's gotten to be too big. Is it too big? Is it a problem for our economy right now?
Okay, so first of all, I mean, that was silly even then. I mean, there were, revenues were temporarily swollen by the dot-com bubble and all of that. And, even in 2001, we knew that people like me were eventually going to hit 65 and start collecting benefits. So, it's so that was a little bit silly to be concerned about that back then. Right now, the debt per se is not really a serious problem. I mean, it's a big number. $34 trillion or something like that. But if we actually look at, what does it cost to service that debt? Well, interest rates are still below the economy's growth rate. And so as long as other non-interest spending and tax receipts are more or less in line, then the debt is really not, it's not a problem to continue servicing it. There's really no reason why that should be an issue. But what is a problem, of course, is that government spending and tax receipts are not in line. And so the fundamental problem is not the debt. The fundamental problem is that we are not managing to pay our way. We're not actually adjusting our inflow with our outflow.
Well, and one way of putting it, I suppose, is not the debt, it's the deficit. It's how much we're actually coming up short each and every year. And I think last year it was something like 8.5, 8.8% of GDP was in deficit. And this is a time when unemployment was very low, by the way. And the growth was good.
Yeah, some of that was interest payments, and really it's the primary deficit, excluding interest payments. But that is a serious problem. We do have an ongoing large primary deficit. Some of that, there were, the year-to-year fluctuations. There's quirky stuff that can move the deficit around. But in a fundamental sense, we're not living within our means at the federal level, and that doesn't necessarily signal any kind of immediate crisis, but it does say that, hey, something's got to give. But the trouble is, what's going to give? So, yeah, that is the real problem is not the numbers. The real problem is that we are not politically, apparently, able to reach any kind of agreement on how to live within our means.
Not an immediate crisis, as you say. At the same time, I remember back in the early 90s when we talked about bond vigilantes, and there was the discussion within the Clinton administration, actually, about the issues with the bond market. At what point is it possible that the bond market might send a powerful message to us? We talked to Paul Ryan recently, who said he thinks that it's quite possible in the next administration, whoever is president, they could be faced with what he would call a debt crisis. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Not particularly, and I'm not sure I know why Paul Ryan would know this any better than anyone else. But the truth is, I've looked at, I've actually put in a fair bit of work myself on what's the historical record of countries that borrow in their own currency experiencing that kind of debt crisis, a strike by lenders, something like that. What are the historical examples of that happening? And there's almost no examples of that. I mean, you end up saying, well, maybe France in 1926, I mean, Japan has had huge debt for decades now, huge persistent deficits, still no crisis. Um, it's actually, I think we should focus less on what's the risk of a single dramatic event and more on the kind of gradual erosion of confidence that comes from the fact that we can't seem to get our act together.
There's no doubt that there are a lot of political challenges, but before we get to the political challenges, what about what the right answer would be if we didn't have to worry about the politics? I mean, there were times in which we actually did cut the deficit, right? Under George Herbert Walker Bush, there was a bipartisan effort that was made at Andrews Air Force Base. And then under President Clinton, it was not bipartisan, actually. The Democrats did it themselves. They cut back on the deficit. What is the right thing to do? Is it more taxes? Is it less spending? Or is it all of the above?
There is no right answer. What we know from cross-national comparisons is that it's certainly possible to have a thriving economy with a lot more taxes than the United States. The United States is near the bottom in terms of tax receipts as a share of GDP among advanced countries. So we could be raising substantially more money, and there's no real indication that higher tax rates would be a problem for U.S. economic growth. On the other hand, we don't have to provide essential health care to everybody. That's not a question of economic rightness or wrongness. It's a question of your values. We don't have to provide adequate retirement income to everybody. Again, that's not an economic imperative. So you can't actually divorce this from politics. This is all about the political decision. What are we going to try to close this gap by making mostly the lives of older Americans tougher? Or are we going to do it by raising taxes, but probably, I mean, that includes raising taxes on the rich, but probably also at least a little bit more taxes on the middle class.
And finally, what interest rate assumptions should we put into the model in deciding how we deal with the deficit? Because some people think we will have elevated interest rates for the foreseeable future, given some of the demands on us, even though the elevated interest rates thus far have surprisingly not hit the economy as much as one would have thought.
Yeah, on interest rates, I am fanatically confused. I mean, I actually think that you can make a really strong case either way. That we went through a long period of extremely low interest rates, which we thought were grounded in fundamentals, especially demography. And then now we've been going through a period of much higher interest rates with the economy remarkably robust in the face of those rates, have long-run sustainable interest rates. R star, if you talk to Fed officials, has R star actually gone up? Or is this just kind of a transitory phase? And I could make the case. I mean, we certainly have, for one thing, the demographic situation has changed, which actually does, by the way, help our long-run budget position, because of all things, I don't think what people were counting on, but it looks like we have substantially increased immigration right now. We also have possibly a lot of new business investment driven by new technologies, AI and all of that. We have the Biden industrial policy, which is inducing a lot of manufacturing investment. So maybe all of that has changed the picture, or maybe actually, 2019 is still what should be our benchmark, and we're going to go back to very low interest rates. And anyone who claims to know for sure what the answer to that is deluding themselves.